At my wedding, my mother-in-law laughed loudly and whispered, "You really think you belong in this family?" I whispered back, "I own the company your husband works for." She blinked, stunned. 20 minutes later, her husband quietly approached me and said, "Please don't fire me. She doesn't know." The power shift was immediate. I never thought my wedding day would turn into a silent battle of power, but here we are. A few minutes before walking down the aisle, as I stood adjusting my veil, trying to calm my nerves, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Priscilla, glided over with a frozen smile. She leaned in as if to share some tender words. Instead, she laughed softly under her breath and whispered, "You really think you belong in this family?" I smiled, not missing a beat, and whispered back, "I own the company your husband works for." Her expression changed instantly. She blinked, stunned, and said nothing. About 20 minutes later, while we were still caught up in post-ceremony photos, her husband Charles quietly came over and said, "Please don't fire me. She doesn't know." It was at that moment I realized, the entire balance of power had shifted without me even raising my voice. When Noah and I first met 5 years ago in Boston, I had no idea what I was walking into with his family. We met at a charity event in the North End. He was charming, kind, and genuine. From our first conversation, it was clear he was nothing like the world he came from, old money attitudes without the old money reality, lots of image, little substance behind it. I grew up differently. Middle-class background, public schools, working 3 jobs through college. I wasn't embarrassed by it, it made me resilient. But it was obvious early on that Priscilla, his mother, saw me as less than. The first time I met her at a Sunday brunch at their house in Cambridge, she sized me up immediately. Not rudely, just clinically. Like I was a contestant auditioning for a part in a show she directed. She smiled politely, but there was a chill underneath. She asked polite but loaded questions about where I went to school, what my parents did for a living, and how big my family's house was. I knew the score from that first meeting. I was under evaluation. Over the years, the comments piled up. Little things that seemed harmless if you weren't paying attention, but cut deep if you were. "Oh, Claire's such a hard worker," she'd say, with a patronizing pat on my arm at Thanksgiving. "Some people just have to be career women, I guess." Or, "Don't worry, darling," she'd tell Noah in front of me. "When the right time comes, Claire will settle down and realize family comes first." I laughed it off publicly. Privately, I let it fuel me. Every time Priscilla subtly hinted that I wasn't enough, I dug in harder at work, drove my career forward like my life depended on it. By the time Noah proposed to me at the Boston Public Garden, down on one knee under a riot of spring blooms, I was no longer the junior executive she thought I was. I had become the majority shareholder and CEO of Bayside Partners, a firm with controlling interests in several consulting and investment companies across New England. One of them was Larkwell Consulting, a mid-sized firm specializing in strategic growth for legacy businesses. Charles, Priscilla's husband, had worked there for years as a senior advisor. I only realized it when we were putting together our guest list and I saw his email signature on the RSVP. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Noah, at first. It felt almost too delicious to ruin. The wedding was beautiful. Small, intimate, classic Boston elegance at Hampshire House. White roses, soft candlelight, just family, and a few very close friends. Noah was beaming, nervous, excited, everything a groom should be. I was genuinely happy, despite knowing what I knew, despite the family dynamics humming quietly under the surface. We were about 15 minutes from starting the ceremony. The guests were taking their seats. I was standing off to the side with my maid of honor, Sienna, going over last-minute details. My heart was racing, my palms a little sweaty from nerves. That's when Priscilla approached. She was wearing an expensive champagne-colored gown, dripping with pearls, smiling wide for the cameras. She leaned in, laughing low in her throat, and said it, that cruel little whisper, "You really think you belong in this family?" It didn't even sting the way it once would have. I just smiled, leaned back, and whispered, "I own the company your husband works for." Her face didn't just change, it shattered. Her mouth opened slightly. She blinked once, twice, and stepped back, like I had physically pushed her. I turned away without another word and took my place to walk down the aisle. The ceremony itself was a blur: vows, tears, smiles. I caught little flashes of Priscilla sitting stiffly in her front row seat, her smile tight, her posture rigid. Charles beside her looked increasingly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his cufflinks. After the ceremony, during the photos, Charles found me. He waited until there was a moment I wasn't surrounded by people. He shuffled over, hands ringing a little, his voice low and urgent. "Claire. Please don't fire me. She doesn't know. She thinks I'm a partner." I looked at him for a long moment. It was like seeing the real man behind the carefully constructed image for the first time. Small, anxious, desperately hanging on to a thread. "Keep doing good work, Charles," I said, smiling softly. "That's all I ask." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for months. From that moment, the air shifted. Priscilla barely spoke to me for the rest of the evening. When she did, it was clipped and formal, none of the usual false sweetness. Charles hovered at her elbow like a ghost. No one noticed, of course, but I just squeezed his hand and whispered that everything was fine. And it was. Better than fine, actually. Because for the first time since I'd met them, I realized I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to impress them, or fit into their tiny box of what a good wife should be. I had built something bigger, something real. And they couldn't touch it. The reception was beautiful. Our friends danced, laughed, and toasted late into the night. Priscilla stayed for the bare minimum, then made some excuse about a headache and left early. Charles followed her out without saying goodbye. Noah and I stayed, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept like a woman who knew she had absolutely nothing to prove. In the days after the wedding, things got quiet. Priscilla, who used to text or call Noah at least once every 2 days with some urgent family updates, suddenly went radio silent. Charles, who had always been a background figure in my life, started sending me polite but increasingly desperate emails about Larkwell projects, attaching quarterly reports with far more detail than necessary. It was almost funny, in a sad way. People like Priscilla lived for control, for the image of control, and I had disrupted that without even raising my voice. I didn't need to threaten anyone. I didn't need to be cruel. I had simply reminded her that real power doesn't shout, it whispers. Noah didn't know the full story yet. I hadn't told him during our honeymoon because honestly, I wanted to enjoy that time with him without dragging family drama into it. We spent 2 weeks traveling through Italy, Florence, Rome, the Amalfi Coast, drinking too much wine, eating gelato under ancient arches, and holding hands on cobblestone streets. It felt good to be away from Boston, away from everything. But life, of course, doesn't stay paused. When we got back, Priscilla invited us to a small family dinner at their home. The kind of event that used to give me anxiety just thinking about it. But now? I felt oddly calm. I said yes without hesitation. The evening was stiff from the start. Priscilla greeted me like she was physically forcing herself to smile, and Charles shook my hand a little too firmly, as if trying to reassert something he wasn't even sure he had anymore. Dinner was roast beef, asparagus, and awkward silences. Priscilla talked endlessly about a charity gala she was chairing in Beacon Hill, dropping names like pebbles into a pond, waiting for someone to be impressed. Noah, sweet Noah, did his best to steer the conversation, but even he couldn't patch over the strain. At one point, Charles brought up Larkwell casually, mentioning a new client they had secured. He glanced at me as he spoke, voice just a little too eager. I nodded politely. I wasn't going to make it easier for him. After dinner, Priscilla cornered me in the sitting room while Noah was helping Charles bring out coffee and dessert. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I suppose you think you're very clever," she said quietly, her voice low and venomous. I met her eyes, steady. I said, just as quietly, that I know how to run a business. She laughed sharply, but it wasn't the confident laugh from the wedding. It was brittle, hollow. You could ruin us, she said. With a snap of your fingers. I tilted my head slightly. I could, I agreed. But why would I? Your husband is good at his job. Larkwell is profitable. I don't fire good employees, Priscilla. I will reward them. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Noah and Charles reappeared, carrying coffee and plates of lemon cake. She snapped her mouth shut so hard I could almost hear her teeth click. The rest of the evening passed in a strained blur. Noah didn't press me about it that night. He knew something was brewing beneath the surface, but he trusted me enough to wait until I was ready to talk. A few days later, sitting together on our couch with takeout cartons between us, I finally told him the full story. I told him about Larkwell. About Charles. About the whispered comment at the wedding. About my whispered reply. Noah listened without interrupting, his face shifting from confusion to anger to disbelief. Jesus, Claire, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. I had no idea. I didn't want to make the wedding about them, I said simply. He shook his head slowly. I can't believe she said that to you, he muttered. Then, after a pause, I'm proud of you. You know that, right? I smiled. I know. He pulled me close and kissed the top of my head. We didn't talk about it much after that. There was no need. Noah wasn't caught between me and his family, he stood firmly with me. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, word must have quietly traveled through their social circles, because over the next few months, the way the rest of Noah's extended family treated me changed noticeably. Before, I was Claire, the working girl who trapped Noah. Now, I was Claire, the impressive businesswoman. Invitations to brunches and charity events flooded in. Cousins and great-aunts who had never bothered to make real conversation before were suddenly effusive in their praise. It was disgusting, honestly, how fast people turned when they thought you were someone of importance. I stayed polite but distant. I attended a few events with Noah because he wanted to keep some family ties intact, but I made it clear through my actions that I wasn't there to grovel or seek approval. I had nothing to prove to them. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding, I got an email from Charles. A formal request for a meeting regarding his position at Larkwell. Reading between the lines, it was clear he was worried about job security. I agreed to meet, not because I intended to fire him, but because it was time to lay everything on the table. We met at a coffee shop in Back Bay. Charles was already there when I arrived, sitting stiffly at a corner table, his coffee untouched. He stood when I approached, and offered a handshake. Claire, he said, a little too loudly. Thank you for meeting with me. I sat down across from him, placing my bag neatly on the chair beside me. Of course, I said. How can I help? He cleared his throat. I want to assure you that my loyalty to Larkwell, and by extension, Bayside Partners, is absolute, he said. I understand there have been misunderstandings in the past. But I value my work. I hope you'll consider that if any decisions need to be made. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. I appreciate your loyalty, Charles, I said finally. But you don't need to be afraid. I make business decisions based on merit, not personal feelings. Relief flooded his face so visibly it was almost embarrassing. Thank you, he said quickly. Really? Thank you. I nodded once, finished my coffee, and stood. Good work speaks for itself, I said. He rose too, babbling thanks again, but I was already walking away. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. About knowing that I held my own power and could choose how to wield it, carefully, quietly, without theatrics. Back at the office, my assistant, Marcia, poked her head into my office. There's a bouquet for you, she said, eyebrows raised. Sure enough, there was a stunning arrangement of orchids and lilies on my desk. No card, but I knew I didn't need one. I smiled faintly, picked up the vase, and moved it to the far corner of my desk. I didn't need flowers. I didn't need apologies. I had everything I needed already. Over the next few months, things between me and Priscilla settled into an uneasy stalemate. She didn't make any more openly rude comments to me, not because she had suddenly developed respect, but because she knew better now. Her smiles were brittle, her hugs forced, and every time she spoke to me, there was a carefulness in her tone that hadn't been there before. Like someone walking barefoot over broken glass. Charles, meanwhile, doubled down at work. He took on extra accounts, volunteered for tedious committees, and made sure every report that crossed my desk had his name attached to it, neatly highlighted. It was both sad and a little amusing to watch. Noah and I focused on building our life together. We bought a brownstone in the South End, not too big, but with just enough space to dream about the future. Sunday mornings became our favorite ritual: coffee in bed, reading the paper, talking about everything and nothing. Still, the tension with his parents simmered in the background. Thanksgiving was the next test. Priscilla insisted on hosting, as usual. Noah was reluctant, but I told him it was fine. I didn't want to start our marriage by alienating him from his family altogether, and honestly, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. When we arrived, Priscilla greeted Noah warmly and gave me a hug that felt like hugging a mannequin. Charles stayed close behind her, smiling a little too hard. Dinner was a formal affair: white tablecloth, fine china, crystal glasses. Everything was staged perfectly, as always. Priscilla lived for these moments, these little pageants of wealth and propriety. The table was full. Noah's younger sister, Camille, and her husband Bryce were there, along with some cousins and a few old family friends. Conversation was polite, a little stilted. Every now and then, I caught Priscilla watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, not with hostility exactly, but with something closer to resentment. At one point, Bryce brought up work, asking casually how things were going at Bayside. I gave a simple answer: busy, but good. We just finalized a new portfolio acquisition. Bryce nodded, interested, and Camille leaned in. "You've always been so driven," she said, a little admiringly. "Honestly, I don't know how you balance it all." I smiled, genuine this time. Camille and I had never been close, but there was no malice in her tone. If anything, she sounded a little envious. Priscilla's mouth tightened visibly. "Well," she said, slicing her turkey with unnecessary force, "not everyone needs to define themselves by work. Some people find fulfillment in family." The words hung there, heavy. Noah reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I didn't flinch. I didn't rise to it. I just smiled sweetly and said, "Luckily, we don't have to choose. We can have both." The rest of dinner passed in brittle silence. Afterward, while the dishes were being cleared, Camille pulled me aside quietly. "I don't know how you do it," she said in a low voice. "Seriously. She's exhausting." I laughed softly. "You get used to it," I said. But I wasn't just getting used to it. I was winning. Quietly, steadily, without even trying anymore. A few weeks later, the first real cracks in Priscilla's social image started to appear. Boston's high society is small, insular, and viciously gossipy. Word had gotten around that Charles wasn't a partner at Larkwell, but just an employee. Some distant cousin with a big mouth must have pieced things together after the wedding and whispered it to the wrong person at a cocktail party. The ripple effect was immediate. Invitations to the more prestigious galas and charity events dried up. Priscilla's name began sliding down donor lists at the Museum of Fine Arts. Suddenly, the important friends she loved so much were too busy to return her calls. She tried to salvage it, of course. She hosted a winter brunch, inviting the best names she could still cling to. Noah and I were invited too, mostly for appearances. We went, mostly because I wanted to see the damage for myself. It was painful to watch. The house, once bustling with chatter and laughter at these events, was half empty. The food was impeccable, the decorations perfect, but the energy was dead. People came, stayed for an obligatory mimosa, and left quickly, murmuring excuses about prior engagements. Priscilla flitted from guest to guest, trying too hard, laughing a little too loudly. Charles hung back, sipping coffee, looking tired. At one point, Priscilla tried to corner me near the dessert table, talking about some future charity ball she was sure to be chairing soon. I nodded politely, offered some vague compliment about the brunch, and drifted away. I didn't need to say anything else. Her world was shrinking without me lifting a single finger. Meanwhile, Noah and I flourished. Work was steady, our marriage was strong, and we were starting to talk, quietly, about trying for a baby sometime in the next year. Life moves forward, it always does. But the tension with Priscilla never fully went away. Around Christmas, she made one last desperate attempt to reassert control. She invited us, along with Camille and Bryce, to a family strategy meeting under the guise of a holiday brunch. It sounded innocent enough on paper, but I knew better. When someone like Priscilla says strategy, it's never about togetherness. It's about control. We showed up, dressed appropriately festive, but the mood in the house was thick. Camille shot me a knowing look as we sat down at the long dining room table set with cinnamon-scented candles and gold chargers. Priscilla handed out printed packets. Yes, actual printed packets. Inside was a proposed family plan for the next year, joint vacations, mandatory attendance at various charity events, scheduled family dinners twice a month, and, the kicker, a proposal that all family members contribute to maintaining the family's social standing and philanthropic reputation. In short, she wanted us to schedule our lives around hers. To prop up her crumbling social facade. I flipped through the packet slowly, feeling a mixture of disbelief and pity. Noah caught my eye, his lips twitching like he was trying not to laugh. Charles sat quietly, eyes downcast. He knew how ridiculous this was but didn't dare say it. When Priscilla finished her speech about the importance of unity, she looked around expectantly. Waiting. Hoping. Camille spoke first. Bless her. I don't think we can commit to something like this, she said carefully. Bryce's work schedule is crazy right now, and, well, we need flexibility. Bryce nodded emphatically, grateful for the out. All eyes turned to us. Noah smiled politely. We love spending time with family, he said, but Claire's career is very demanding. And honestly? We prefer to keep our schedule open. He looked at me then, silently asking if I wanted to add anything. I just smiled, closed the packet gently, and said, "We'll see you when we can." It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an argument. It was a clean, quiet refusal. Priscilla's face tightened, but she said nothing. She knew better now. The meeting ended shortly after, awkward and strained. As Noah and I left, walking out into the cold December air, I slipped my hand into his and squeezed. He squeezed back. We didn't need to say anything. We had already won. The winter dragged on in Boston, heavy with gray skies and frozen sidewalks. Noah and I stayed busy with work and quiet weekends at home, while Priscilla's world continued to slowly collapse around her. By February, word had gotten around that Larkwell's board of directors, the real power behind the scenes, was considering restructuring. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Larkwell had plateaued, and Bayside partners had to make decisions that would maximize returns. Charles was safe for the moment, but it was clear he wasn't in a position to dictate terms anymore. The news reached Priscilla, of course. I didn't hear it directly, but Camille told me in a hushed phone call that her mother had been in a state, ranting about how those greedy corporations were ruining good people's lives. It was almost comical, hearing her talk about corporate greed like she wasn't the living embodiment of entitlement. Meanwhile, my own position only solidified. Bayside had a record-breaking first quarter. I was profiled in a business magazine. Invitations to panels and networking events flooded in. People who had once dismissed me as Noah's working wife were now practically tripping over themselves to praise me. I never mentioned it to Priscilla. I didn't have to. The final confrontation came almost by accident. In early spring, Charles and Priscilla decided to throw a lavish anniversary party, their 35th, at a historic hotel downtown, the Fairmont Copley Plaza. It was supposed to be a night of glamour and old-world charm, a way to reclaim their fading social status. They invited everyone they knew. Family, old friends, business acquaintances. And, of course, they invited Noah and me. I didn't want to go at first. The idea of sitting through a night of performative nostalgia wasn't appealing. But Noah convinced me. "Let's just go," he said, laughing. "Smile, drink their champagne, and leave early." Fair enough. When we arrived, the ballroom was stunning. Golden chandeliers, soft classical music, crisp white linens. But the crowd was thinner than expected. Familiar faces were missing. A lot of the old money families had found excuses not to attend. Priscilla greeted us with a tight smile, decked out in a shimmering silver gown. Charles looked tired, as always. Dinner was served, speeches made, toasts raised. And then, the real moment. Near the end of the evening, Priscilla took the microphone. She smiled out at the guests, through her eyes flicked nervously around the room, as if mentally counting how many important people had actually shown up. She began thanking everyone for coming, talking about the importance of loyalty, tradition, family. And then, she pivoted. She started talking about the dangers of modern corporate greed, how family businesses were being gutted by outsiders who didn't understand real values. It was so transparently aimed at me that several heads at our table turned to glance in my direction. I sipped my champagne, completely unfazed. Noah tensed beside me, but I just patted his knee slightly under the table. Let her talk. Let her flail. When she finally wrapped up, there was a smattering of polite applause. She set the microphone down with a satisfied little nod, as if she had scored some secret victory. I let the evening drag on for another 20 minutes. I chatted politely with Camille, complimented the dessert table, smiled for a few photos. And then, as we were putting on our coats to leave, I saw my opportunity. Charles was standing alone near the entrance, sipping a whiskey. I walked over, Noah a few steps behind me. "Charles," I said warmly. "Congratulations again. 35 years is impressive." He smiled thinly. "Thank you, Claire," he said. "We're very proud." I nodded, setting my clutch delicately on the table beside me. "By the way," I said casually, "I wanted to give you a heads up. Larkwell's restructuring is being finalized next week. You'll be receiving an offer." His face paled. "An offer?" I smiled sweetly. "Early retirement. Generous severance package. Full pension benefits." I tilted my head. "You'll be very comfortable. But it's non-negotiable." He stared at me, speechless. Behind him, I saw Priscilla approaching, sensing something was wrong. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low but clear. "I don't fire good employees, Charles. But I do retire the ones whose usefulness has peaked." Charles opened his mouth, but no words came out. Priscilla reached us, her smile faltering. "Everything all right?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I straightened up, picking up my clutch. "Everything's perfect," I said brightly. "Just congratulating Charles on his upcoming retirement." Priscilla blinked. "Retirement?" she echoed, like she hadn't heard correctly. Charles still hadn't found his voice. I smiled warmly, turned to Noah, and said, "Ready, babe?" He nodded, stifling a grin. We walked out of the ballroom arm in arm, leaving Priscilla standing there, staring after us, realization slowly dawning across her carefully botoxed face. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't public humiliation. It was simply the end of their illusion. They had spent years looking down on me, assuming I would always be on the outside, struggling to earn a seat at their table. And now? They were the ones scrambling to hold on to the scraps. In the weeks that followed, Charles officially accepted the retirement package. Larkwell announced the restructuring quietly. No wrongdoing, no drama. Just a soft, inevitable fade. Priscilla retreated further from the social scene, blaming personal reasons for stepping back from her charity work. The invitations that still came, fewer and farther between now, were increasingly extended to Noah and me, with polite inquiries about whether his lovely wife would be attending. I accepted the ones I wanted. Declined the ones I didn't. Life moved forward. Noah and I traveled. We hosted our own gatherings, simple, joyful ones, filled with real friends who didn't care about last names or net worth. And when, a year later, I found out I was pregnant, the first person I told, after Noah, was Camille. Because family, I realized, isn't something you marry into. It's something you build yourself, brick by honest brick. And as for Priscilla? Well, she's still in Boston. Still clinging to whatever remnants of her old life she can. But she knows, now. She knows exactly where she stands. And exactly who put her there. Without ever raising my voice. Without ever stooping to her level. Just by standing my ground, and smiling.